When I first began practicing some 40 odd years ago, it seemed everybody came to Zen seeking enlightenment experiences. However, they understood that from the popular literature available at the time, whether D.T. Suzuki or Philip Kapleau or Alan Watts. And that orientation to practice baked in a lot of assumptions about the nature of practice. About the nature of Buddhism, whether it was a religion or not, what it meant to be a Buddhist. And these assumptions ripple on down to the present day in ways that we sometimes remain unconscious about. But Andrew Tutel down in Australia asked me to talk to his group later about why I am a Buddhist and what that means. And so I thought I'd reflect on some of the issues involved in trying to answer that question. See, our early day experiences were very much about having special kinds of experiences. We weren't quite sure what they were going to do for us, but they certainly seemed very special. And in the old stories, they were totally transformative and life-changing. But the idea was really much more that the experiences would be life-changing, not so much that we should begin by changing our life, how we were living it. We might have had an ongoing meditation practice of some kind or another, but the emphasis tended to be on finding time to go away for intensive retreats, 5-7 days. And these would be crucibles in which would generate these experiences we were after. And if we sat on a regular or daily basis, it was sort of like in the spirit of training for a marathon. You know, we might do our hour a day, but really we were building up to this big sesshin experience where we would do, 14 hours a day. And so the sesshins indeed would be extraordinary experiences. They would often be physical ordeals involving a good deal of physical pain or sleeplessness, or just being thrown in with a whole group of people, sleeping in all together in one big room, eating our meals oryoki style and on the cushion in zazen. And there was really often a great sense of camaraderie among the people who went through these together, as if, they were all people you climbed a big mountain with. It was you had gone through the army with. You had endured an ordeal. You had pulled together towards some common goal and got each other through it. And when you do intensive sessions like that, if only because you're putting yourself through physically something that is so intensely different than your everyday life, people get pushed to all sorts of limits and they have extraordinary experiences. Just the session itself is an extraordinary experience. But as you all know, in that kind of conditions, you may be prone to bouts of crying, flooded with memory or emotion, sometimes intense periods of joy or peace or calm. And we'd come away from those experiences feeling like we had a taste of something, which was true. But for many people, it was like the experience of traveling to a foreign country, seeing new landscapes, seeing different art, tasting different food, hearing different languages. But then we came home. We went back to our regular life and we sort of wondered, well, what kind of difference did that make? In a sense, we were kinds of spiritual tourists traveling to a lot of exotic locales, but coming back after a week and just going back to our life as it was before, except that now we thought we were somewhat special people because we had been to this very extraordinary place that other people hadn't gone to. So part of the mentality of that kind of practice was that it inherently had a kind of instrumentalist dimension to it. Practice had this kind of goal-oriented substrate of inducing special experiences. And there was inevitably a lot of thought, particularly back in the days of the 60s and 70s, about couldn't psychedelic drugs give us some kind of shortcut to those experiences? And the answer, of course, is both yes and no. They can give you a certain kind of experience, but we find out that the experience is not just a matter of extraordinary feelings or visions happening inside our head, but the whole dimension of effort and community and ordeal was not separable from the experience itself at some other important level. It does make a difference whether you've really made the commitment and the effort and developed the endurance and the discipline to put yourself through a session. That's just doing that changes you in a certain way, completely separate from whatever experience you have, and certainly different from the experience of just swallowing a capsule. And that becomes part of the way we started to move out of that instrumentalist attitude. We saw that extraordinary as these experiences were, they may or may not trickle down very much into our regular life. What actually seemed to make a difference in our lives was the commitment and the discipline and the endurance and the habits of attention that the intensive practice of sesshin required. We had to become a certain kind of person in order to do that on any kind of regular basis. It's why now when people ask me, what do I have to do to become your student? My basic answer is show up. You need to develop a certain kind of meditation practice and learn how to do that. But the showing up itself, well, that may be the thing that changes your life the most. Just the commitment to put aside the time, day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, when it's no longer novel or exciting. When you make a commitment to do something like that, you become a different kind of person, regardless of what happens or doesn't happen when you're sitting on your cushion. Because of that, I tended for a long time to tell people I was religious, not spiritual. A lot of people trying to escape bad childhood experiences of organized religion like to think of themselves as spiritual but not religious. But I preferred it the other way around, because spiritual for those people tended to imply the pursuit of special kinds of experiences. Whereas for me, religious meant that kind of commitment day in and day out to a kind of practice, and a practice that was part of a tradition. It wasn't, this week I'll try for this kind of experience, and next week I'll go to this other group and maybe I'll have another kind of experience, and next summer I'll go on this kind of retreat. Maybe then I'll go to Nepal. It's not like we're collecting special experiences all over the map in any way that suits our fancy. But to say that we're religious is to commit to a particular form and a particular discipline and tradition and stay with it. That's making a kind of commitment and a willingness to stay with this rather than that, to not go off in the endless pursuit of novelty, but to stay with something, develop it, see where it goes. Now, in a certain sense, I could say I'm a Buddhist in the same way that I say I'm a psychoanalyst. It's what I do. It's what I practice. And I have a kind of commitment to Buddhism that's analogous to my commitment to psychoanalysis, in the sense that I'm committed to its ongoing development. I'm committed to thinking through what works and what doesn't work and what makes sense in a modern contemporary society. What are the basic assumptions of each and where did they come from and how have they been handed down to us and what needs to change about them in light of what's happened in the world since their founding. As a psychoanalyst, as part of my training, I studied Freud. And in fact, one of the first projects I engaged in was a study of Freud's case studies, comparative study, thinking about them in light of contemporary self-psychology theory. That was, I think, the first book I edited. I wrote chapters on the different Freud case studies. But I'm not a Freudian. And if somebody challenges me about psychoanalysis saying, well, how can you still believe in Freud's drive theory? Isn't that completely outmoded 19th century science? And I said, I agree with you. I don't believe in that anymore. But being a psychoanalyst doesn't mean being a Freudian. It means being part of a whole cultural tradition and development that started with Freud, that has evolved in all sorts of ways and directions since then. And the same is true of Buddhism. At some point, I read the Dhammapada and the Lotus Sutra and this and that of the original texts. I don't think I ever read them with the same depth or critical eye that I read Freud, but I read them and then moved on to the Chinese literature in the koan collections, where I really think we see the beginning of Zen. But I'm no more a Buddhist because I think that the words ascribed to Shakyamuni are the be-all and end-all of our current notion of what Buddhism is. I see Buddha, like Freud, through his own incredible effort and insight, setting in motion a long tradition of practice and philosophy that has come down to us now 2,500 years later in forms that in many ways would be unrecognizable to the founder. As far as I'm concerned, that's just fine. That's how it's supposed to be. If something is alive, it's got to keep growing and developing and changing. Otherwise, we're just antiquarians, and we're studying something that's an artifact. So when I say I am a Buddhist, just like when I say I'm a psychoanalyst, I say I'm part of an evolving tradition that I've tried to study and respect. And I also accept responsibility for part to maintain and change it in light of what's going on now and what I see and understand and what I see it doing or not doing for the people who are trying to practice it. And part of the practice is to see that it is the discipline and commitment, connection with others, and the formation of the community as a sangha. All these things are as much a part of what it means to be a Buddhist as it is to have some special experience on a cushion. See, one of the lessons of Buddhism is that we are not simply what's going on inside of our heads. We are not isolated minds. First of all, we're embodied. And that body brings with it dependency on conditions and on other people. And who we are is never something that we create autonomously on our own, but is a byproduct of co-creation of our interaction with others, within a society, within a tradition, as a result of history. And to really understand who we are, we can't simply introspect and look inside and see what seems to be happening moment to moment in our heads or in our minds. But we have to understand where we're situated. We don't know who we are unless we understand where we are and where we come from. Just the same way as we can't understand what a particular species of animal is unless we have a good understanding of its habitat, where it lives and how it lives, what it eats. Is it a predator? Is it preyed on? Is it a social animal? Is it solitary? All these things aren't just about the private experience of what's it like to be that kind of animal. It's how does the animal live in its world? So I think that after all these years, practice has come around to this kind of ongoing form of life, not simply about what special experiences have I had that I've put in a scrapbook, like pictures of my trip to Venice, but how am I living day to day? What am I actually doing? And how did I get and inherit those practices and forms and ideas? And how do I express a religious attitude towards my day-to-day life, which is a non-instrumental attitude. It's not an attitude of what am I trying to make happen, or am I there yet, or what am I doing? A religious attitude eventually, I think, comes down to simply something like appreciation. It's leaving everything alone, using this container of practice, whether analytic or spiritual or meditative, to simply be present to our life as it is, which we see ramifying out in all these social and historical and cultural directions. And then I think we have what I believe is a religious feeling or a religious attitude to life. And that is a whole spectrum of feelings that sometimes are very quiet and gentle and sometimes very intense. But I think they run the gamut from things like acceptance to appreciation to gratitude to joy to awe or wonder. Those are not experiences we can make happen or cultivate through extraordinary practices. They're the byproduct of living a certain kind of way in a certain kind of life. Those are the fruits of our practice, our religious practice.